Okay, I'm going to do one review in my temporary surroundings. As I mentioned in my previous video, I just recently received another strike against my channel, this time for inciting violence. Which is really funny given those of you who followed the post I did about that in the book. Will find that especially amusing because this is a channel where I review books and talk about the contents thereof, and there is exactly zero call for physical violence anywhere on my channel. But alas, the reptilian overlords have spoken, so far be it from me to doubt them. Moving right along to an actual review. This is The Road Taken by Senator Patrick Leahy. Now, I will admit, I have not read this cover to cover. I am intrigued, though. I bought this because I was watching the Jimmy Dore show, of all things, and they mentioned this book in there and mentioned a specific passage. And of course, me being me, I, of course, ran to the interwebs and ordered a copy. And some very interesting things in here. So I'm just going to get right to I'm just going to cut right to the chase here. And so what this is this is Patrick Leahy's story of being Patrick Leahy. And typically books like this, I don't assign a whole lot of value to them because they're more legacy books of guys like this trying to just put out their official narrative of their time in office and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of fluff and a lot of political back scratching and such that's, again, not really. I guess if you're a real political purist, some of this stuff can be interesting, but I've tried to suffer through some of these books that I just found really tedious. But I'm kind of curious now about this. Now, the part that I'm going to bring up, that I'm going to address in here, is related to the Iraq War. Those of you who were around paying attention during that time, back in the fall of 2002, that was really the really heated run-up to the war, where during that time, that was when they were having the congressional hearings on the use of force, which was one of those legal fictions that I'm surprised anybody allowed to happen. But basically it was this, and we're still operating under that now. That's still a thing that's used to basically wage war wherever the sitting president is so inclined. And the idea being that rather than have Congress declare war, which is the job of Congress, the president cannot declare war. The Congress has to issue a formal declaration of war. But to get around that, they came up with this kind of bizarre legalese where Congress could basically authorize the use of force to the president to say, hey, kind of like, Harry, we'll let you borrow our handgun, just, be careful with it. So that's essentially what was being decided in the fall of 2002 as to this use of force. And during those hearings, a lot of interesting stuff came to light. One of which, and I've looked all over trying to find some articles that I could link about this, but one of them, and I heard all this because at the time I was doing outside sales and spending a lot of time in the car, and I had my radio constantly tuned into NPR listening to these hearings as they were live. And one of the things that came up, and I think it was Cynthia McKinney that brought this up, was that there had been a $200 million ad campaign launched to sell the war to the American public. And of course, this was money being paid out to talk show hosts and media personalities, all that sort of thing. That whole period of time, I think, is really fascinating. And especially, I think it's a really important thing if you find yourself to be more on the right-leaning side of the political spectrum. I think it's really important to go back and revisit that era and really see what went down, because if you got swept up in that, it's a good idea to go back and see all the evidence was there to see that that was an insane move that the country did. And on the left side of the spectrum, if you saw that for what it was and saw through it, now you have even more call to see through the foolishness that's happening right now. But anyway, back to Patrick Leahy. So the interesting thing is, and I'm just going to paraphrase, I've got this dog-eared. This is on, if you've got this book, or if you want to find it, this is on page 298, and it goes to, there's several parts of this, to 301. But what he describes is a really curious scenario where, and if again, I think if memory serves me right, he's describing that this was happening all during those congressional hearings in that fall of 2002, that he and his wife were out walking and close to their house, and two joggers, he describes them as very fit joggers, which make of that whatever you will, that ran up to him and said, asked him about the classified documents that he had seen that were being used to start the Iraq War, or that were being shown to them as reason for Congress to authorize the use of force. And he said, he didn't know who they are, he can't talk about that, that's all classified. And they said, you need to ask for a file, blah, blah, blah. And they told him the file he needed to ask for. So they ran on their way, and the next day he went in and to his office and went over to, I think he mentions it here, what office it is that he goes to request this file. Let's see, the secure room in the Capitol. So it was in the Capitol building where he requested this particular file. And sure enough, this file supported the idea that the invasion of Iraq was stupid, and there was no threat of weapons of mass destruction or anything like that. And so these joggers had run up and told him a specific file look that contradicted the official intelligence narrative. So he looked at this file, and sure enough, it contradicted that, and he was like, okay. So a few days later, he's out walking with his wife again, and yet again, the same two dudes come running along, and they ask him, hey, so did you see file such and such? And of course he says, I can't tell you that, that's all classified. And they say, now you need to ask for such and such file. And they gave him the name of that file. And sure enough, he went back and asked for that file, and sure enough, that file also contradicted even further the official narrative that there was an imminent threat of weapons of mass destruction. So as a result, he voted no to the use of force, and the rest is history. But here's what I find really interesting about this, and the fact that it was included in this book, I think, is really telling, because of course you're putting out a book like this, it's almost like this book will outlive you. It's almost like he wanted this on the official record in some way. So I'm kind of curious what you all think about this. Personally, what I found interesting about this is there were rumors all the way back to the early 90s of a group, a white hat group, so to speak, within the US government in the intelligence community called Com-12, I believe it was called, that was supposedly a group of high-level intelligence operatives and whatnot that were against a lot of the darker things being done in the intelligence community, and were supposedly working on behalf of the forces of good to right these things. And this kind of anecdote in here kind of makes you wonder about that. And it's also kind of ominous when you realize, like, the British weapons guy, David Kelly, Dr. David Kelly, I believe it was, that wound up turning up dead after going for a walk around his property, wound up dead and some believe he might have even been tortured before being killed. So the idea that these two joggers just jogged off and went off to a happy retirement is unlikely. The scary thing about that is there's a high probability those two guys may have met their demise as a result of this attempted intervention in foreign policy like this. So again, I'm curious, this audience, what you all think of that. It does give me a little bit of hope to think that there might be a genuine white hat effort within the U.S. intelligence community. But I find it interesting, he also follows it up with this kind of chilling segment, and this they didn't mention on the Jimmy Dore show. He talks about Dick Cheney telling him to go F himself, which some of you probably remember that episode too. But I'm just going to read this. He talks about on another walk, as they were walking around his neighborhood, he talks about this time a car pulled up that was obviously, it says, black cars with multiple antennas and darkened windows passed us by. That was not unusual because of various officials in the administration who lived out in that area. As we reached Georgetown Pike, right by the Quaker Meeting House, one of the vehicles pulled up. And of course, this is after the jogger episode happened twice. A member of the presidential inner circle leaned out from the back window, greeting both myself and Marcel, that's his wife, and asked if he could talk with me. We were about a half a mile from home, and she continued on walking, so his wife keeps going on ahead. I got in the car with him while the security people got out of the car. We sat there and talked, and he said, quote, I understand you've seen file 8 and 12, and those were the classified files that countered the official narrative. I said I had, and I knew, of course, that he'd seen them. He said, quote, I also understand that you're going to vote against going to war. I said, quote, I am, because we all know there are no weapons of mass destruction, and the reasons for going to war are just not there. He asked if he could talk me out of that, and I said no, and we ended the conversation. I started to get out of the car, and he said they would give me a ride home. Thanks, let me tell you where I live. We know where you live. And that's where he ends the story. So, now I'm not saying Patrick Leahy is some knight in white, in shining armor, and he's the guy that was trying to save the world or anything like that. This is kind of a sad, tragic tale of, it makes you wonder how many other senators had interactions like that with intelligence, honest intelligence personnel, trying to steer them from going off of a cliff, and ignored that and went their way. And again, it also makes you wonder what happened to these two dudes and anybody else, any other honest intelligence personnel. I'm going to link at the end of this video to another book, and I can't think of the name off, but be sure to check the end screen, because there's a couple of other books kind of related to this that this made me think of when I think it was the Office of Special Plans. There's some stuff that went down with them, and there seemed to be some honest people even within the FBI trying to address some of that foolishness. But anyway, interesting passage in The Road Taken, brand new memoir by Senator Patrick Leahy. Again, I'm not vouching for him one way or the other. I just find that an interesting story, and I'm curious, any of you, if you have heard about that or have any opinions on that one way or the other. And anyway, I'll leave it at that. And again, I apologize for my very stark surroundings. I'm not in literal social media jail. I'm just in a warehouse where I work. This is the most convenient place I found to film a video. So thanks again for watching, and again, check the end screen.